Well, defence spending has been in the headlines this week as the coalition unveiled plans to invest an additional $21 billion into the military. I spoke to Albert Palazzo, former Director of War Studies for the Australian Army and adjunct professor at UNSW, about this a short time ago. He started by telling me what he thinks of Peter Dutton's plans. I'll get straight into it. As you've no doubt seen,
Yes.
defence spending has been in the headlines this week as the coalition unveiled plans to invest an additional $21 billion into the military. What do you make, first of all, of Peter Dutton's plans?
Well, the military has been underfunded for some time, but 21 million is really just a drop in the bucket to what's needed. And his intention to raise the percentage of GDP to 2.5 or perhaps eventually to 3% is actually, fairly meaningless. It's not what really matters. So, it's a nice announceable, but doesn't really get to the heart of Australia's security requirements.
There's already a lot of questions about how that would be funded, but you're saying it should be even more than what's been put on the table.
Well, no, not necessarily. What I'm saying is that the GDP as a guide really isn't very significant. It's what you're buying that matters. And at the moment, what both parties plan to buy for the security of the country is really not the correct stuff. We're buying the wrong things, and we're in AUKUS. And AUKUS is really the problem, not the solution to Australia's national security.
All right, let's start with your first point there. What sorts of things do you think we should be buying?
Well, we've entered the future where it's now possible to control the sea from the land using distant strike missiles, which have incredible precision today, and also to employ drones and other uncrewed systems, both airborne drones and also maritime drones, surface ones and subsurface ones. So, buying submarines or any really surface warship for a country like Australia doesn't really make any sense. It might make sense for the United States. Submarines still have their place, nuclear-powered submarines, but there are places, the United States needs them. Australia can meet its security requirements with other modern systems that can launch precision missiles.
You're talking about moving away entirely from things like nuclear submarines and manned warships. Wouldn't that weaken our status as an ally with the US? And what would that mean for our role in the Pacific moving forward?
Well, our role as an ally our role as an ally to the U.S. The first thing to understand when you talk about allies is that each ally, each country, still has its own interests, and our interests, Australia's interests, are better served not by providing the U.S. with additional things that it can use, that the United States can commandeer and use in any war that it starts or gets involved in. We can, as Australia, we can protect our own interests by developing an Australian defence force that is designed to protect Australia. And that should be our first priority.
Tell us more about what that would look like.
Well, it would require first a philosophical change by the Australia's political leaders, and that is to focus on what I call, or what is called, the strategic defensive. Now, the strategic defensive is a military philosophy in which a country such as Australia, which has no reason or needs to go to war with another country, focuses strictly on its own defense. Now, this is not neutrality, and I'm not saying we don't need a defense force, because we do. And we need to have a strong defense force, but it is one that should have the equipment and the orientation and the training that maximizes the defensive potential. And if we were to do that, we wouldn't need nuclear-powered submarines, which are quite useless for a country like Australia.
We have seen in recent months an increase in Chinese naval vessels in our waters. Mixed views as to how concerned we should be about that. But what's your take on that?
Well, Australia is definitely becoming a great power. It is a rival to the United States. That doesn't necessarily make it a rival to Australia. And as a rising global power, it is flexing its muscles. And so, yes, that is what we were seeing. It's circumnavigation of Australia, and it's conducting a live fire exercises at such a distance from its shore. It's definitely sending us a message. But the message that it's sending is best countered through diplomatic means, through regional engagement with our neighbors, through building up the strength to protect ourselves. Because when the chips go down, you have to ask yourself the question, if a war does eventuate between the United States and China, does Australia want to be involved in a war between two nuclear-armed powers? Because being the little guy stuck between two great powers is a very uncomfortable place in a future nuclear war.